Hello. Here we are again for another Wikipedia article review about the Soviet Union, this one about the Cold War. For a while, this article was listed as an A-class article, which means it's considered to be among Wikipedia's better, if not best articles. Thankfully, this classification was removed. As we're about to see, well, after the Cold War is over, Cold War propaganda ironically suffuses every inch of the article, as just about every claim in this article about the Soviet Union that paints Soviet Union in a negative light is written by a current or former US government official or ally. No, I'm serious, but we'll get to that. Anyways, the problems with the article begin not far in. This article subtly frames the beginning of the Cold War as the Soviet Union causing the war, with America wanting cooperation until the evil, devious Soviets ruined it by not cooperating with the US. Specifically, it implies that Harry Truman launched the Cold War as a principled reaction to Stalin's broken promises, and that if Stalin had just cooperated, more things would have been fine. This could not be further from the truth. In reality, the Soviet Union cooperated with the West in numerous ways that have been conveniently forgotten by history. The Soviet Union actually arguably harmed itself and other socialist movements in multiple ways to appease the West, just to get screwed over by the West. Anyways, as a non-exhaustive list of the examples as to how the Soviet Union tried to cooperate with the West after WW II, Stalin agreed to withdraw Soviet troops in Austria. Stalin agreed to not help the communist fighters in Greece. Stalin was in fact so angry about Tito supporting the communists in Greece that played a major role in the Tito-Stalin split. The article talks about the 1948 election in Italy, but it doesn't mention that the election was literally rigged by the CIA. Meanwhile, the Italian Communist Party also complained about a lack of support from the Soviets, which was yet another attempt by Stalin to appease the West, who also told the communist parties in both Italy and France to not attempt a revolution either. Stalin didn't even create the Warsaw Pact. It wasn't until 1955, 7 years after the founding of NATO, and 2 years after Stalin's death, that the Warsaw Pact was created. The article also contradicts itself. At one point it says that the Soviet Union did not want to create a united Germany, a claim, of course, written by the Cold Warrior, hard-right conservative John Lewis Gaddis. But later on, the Wikipedia article itself points out that Stalin made multiple additional proposals to reunite East Germany, and that there is very direct evidence that the Soviet Union did want a unified Germany. The US had secretly decided that a unified and neutral Germany was undesirable, with Walter Bedell Smith telling General Eisenhower, "In spite of our announced position, we really do not want nor intend to accept German unification on any terms that the Russians might agree to, even though they seem to meet most of our requirements." It doesn't get any more obvious than that. Of course, then the article adds that some scholars dispute the genuineness of Stalin's attempts to really unite Germany. Okay, let's see who wrote that. So it comes from the Woodrow Wilson Center. Okay, so who works there? A bunch of US government officials? Wow. What a surprise. The US government investigated itself and found that it was actually the Soviets' fault. The Woodrow Wilson Center is also in control of such esteemed and trustworthy institutions, such as the Kissinger Institute, which anti-Soviet propagandist and Rabic neoconservative Anne Applebaum was a part of, or the Kennan Institute, named after George Kennan, a rabid anti-communist and architect of the Cold War. So we have a direct quote from a US general admitting in private that the Soviets tried to create a unified Germany versus a right-wing US think tank made up of neocons saying, "Nu-uh." Another classic example of the US government investigating itself and finding that it did nothing wrong. How convenient. The US went on to portray the Berlin airlift as some heroic liberation, when they caused the conditions that made the Berlin airlift in the first place. It was a masterstroke of capitalist propaganda, really. And again, later in the article, it points out that Poland and Khrushchev also both tried to create a solution to the situation in Germany. The Russians were clearly willing to agree to a unified Germany like they had with Austria, not just under Stalin, but also under Khrushchev. It was the US that forced a split Germany to heat up the Cold War. From when Truman first came to power after FDR's death, there was an immediate cooling in relations with the Soviet Union, even while WW2 was still going on. And this was not coincidental. In reality, it was Truman's plan from the beginning to break with the Soviets. Truman, along with being a corrupt kleptocrat and proud racist, was a fervent anti-communist, chosen as the running mate for FDR in the 1944 elections as a way to appease more conservative members of Congress. No matter what Stalin did, Truman would have found some excuse to start the Cold War, given that he saw not just the Soviet Union, but communism as a whole as a threat. The article also portrays Radio Liberty, a CIA-funded anti-Soviet propaganda outfit, as attempting to peacefully bring down communism. The problem here with this is the word peaceful, as it was the exact opposite of peace. These were propaganda arms used to justify armed conflict with the USSR. These radio broadcasts serve to inflame tensions and bring about war and violent protests. Who does this part cite, I wonder? So, it was written by Arch Puddington of Freedom House, a conservative Washington, D.C. nonprofit. As it so happens, Arch Puddington also worked for Radio Liberty. Oh man. If people just did the slightest bit of research into who are the types of so-called scholars that demonize the Soviet Union, the world would be a much different place. Now, though, we get to the biggest problem of the article, which is what it doesn't include. Despite being another huge aspect of the Cold War, McCarthyism and the Red Scare is only referenced in the See Also section. This is in spite of the fact that the Red Scare was fundamentally a part of the Cold War, a way of censoring and silencing opposition to America in support of its enemies. You couldn't even have a single sentence about this? A source about Operation Gladio, which was the covert war in Europe against leftist movements, is also mentioned in the sources, but there is not a single mention of Gladio in the Wikipedia page itself, despite this being a huge aspect of the Cold War. Interesting. Nor is there a mention of Operation Paperclip, nor of the many Nazis in high-ranking places in NATO. The only mention of any of that is a single picture, which makes me think there may have once been something more, but it probably got removed from the article. All of these events were very much a part of the Cold War. The Nazis were used as part of the Cold War. Operation Gladio occurred as part of the Cold War. McCarthyism occurred as part of the Cold War. Yet none of these are even briefly mentioned. The Soviet perspective of the Cold War is mostly not mentioned either. We get plenty about Truman's containment doctrine and how the Americans believed this was a war of ideas and how perspectives and approaches evolved over time, but almost nothing from the Soviets in terms of their ideological perspective or how their thinking evolved. It's an extremely non-neutral Western perspective. The one thing the article does well is that it seems to do a good job discussing foreign coups by the US against leftist governments. I didn't in-depth review every single coup it talks about, but it doesn't seem to miss any major ones and is overall fair in its treatment of them from my impression. It's a reminder that a Wikipedia page like this is technically an ideological amalgamation of dozens of different contributors in a sort of semi-war with one another, or just ignoring each other and sticking to their specific area of the article. The rest of the article has some issues as well, but these were the biggest things I noticed. In all, I hope this video serves as just another reminder that Wikipedia is not some neutral, perfect communicator of reality, and is in fact littered with proud neoliberal editors who will happily and frequently fill every inch of an article with propaganda taken directly from people associated with think tanks with connections to the US government and CIA, among other unsavory institutions. If people could simply learn when reading any source to check the background of the source, to just put their mouse over that little number and look at who wrote it, we'd have a communist utopia in no time. But anyways, the channel can't exist without financial support, so check out the Patreon and all that.
Расцветали яблони и груши, поплыли туманы над рекой.